The Genuine Article. Discussion and commentary based on articles from JACC.
Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, or as we all know it, JACC. And I'm here with another edition of the Genuine Article, where I discuss some of the interesting papers and some of the interesting topics that the journal is dealing with at the current time. And what I'd like to talk about now is the subject of meta-analysis. The editors of JACC are really impressed with the number of manuscripts we're receiving that use meta-analysis to address a variety of clinical questions. And I have to be honest that these meta-analysis papers really produce among the most spirited discussions on the part of the editors. Many of the editors are a bit skeptical of the value. Some of the editors are much more inclined to view these kinds of manuscripts as being particularly useful for practitioners. Now, a meta-analysis, as you know, searches the medical literature for all the manuscripts that have been published on a given topic and then synthesizes them and subjects them to some statistical analysis in an attempt to derive new information from the whole that was really not available in any one of the individual papers. And so meta-analyses have some very, very attractive advantages. In an era when the amount of medical literature is exploding and it's hard to keep up, a meta-analysis will really take a large number of articles and combine them and synthesize them and extract a coherent and often important conclusion. And that's very attractive for all of us who are trying to keep up with this medical literature. The process of meta-analysis can identify important questions that need to be answered and can show holes in the literature. In fact, it can help in some of these manuscripts that really have very complicated statistics and very complicated analysis. It can help us really to weed through that and get at the conclusion. And finally, meta-analysis can show a statistically significant effect when it analyzes a group of manuscripts which was not evident from any single manuscript. And perhaps the most important or the most often used example of this involves the use of thrombolytic agents. And there are numerous reports that actually meta-analyses of a number of small thrombolytic trials showed the efficacy of this form of therapy in acute MI long before the major randomized clinical trials of large proportion were actually done. Having said that, meta-analyses remain fairly controversial. There are, of course, a number of potential difficulties. Of course, a meta-analysis depends upon the quality of the studies that are going into it. Importantly, there can be substantial heterogeneity in these studies, and the heterogeneity can involve the way the study was done, the patients, or the location, or the protocol, or it can involve the results, so that some studies are positive, some studies are negative. Heterogeneity can confuse things. And there's this issue of publication bias, the fact that negative trials are often not published, and therefore one is left only with the positive trials, which don't necessarily lead us to the appropriate conclusion. But one thing I've become impressed with as the editor is the methodology of these meta-analyses is terribly important. They've got to be done very well. One has to ensure that the entire literature is actually reviewed, and then it becomes very critical as to which manuscripts are included and which ones are excluded, because by determining which ones are actually included, one can majorly influence the results. And of course, it's important to use appropriate statistical methodology to actually extract those data. So that we're really seeing a deluge of these meta-analyses, and the skeptics will look at it and say, well, gosh, is it possible that someone can take different studies on different patients using different methodologies over different periods of time and put these all together and actually come out with something coherent? The skeptics often quip that meta-analysis is to analysis as metaphysics is to physics, that we're trying to really take a bunch of disjointed data and try to somehow homogenize them. And on the other hand, there are those individuals that point to the value of meta-analyses. For instance, the whole issue of acute stent thrombosis with drug-eluting stents really was brought to the fore by a meta-analysis of a large number of trials, no single one of which really showed a significant potential for stent thrombosis in and of itself. For myself, I guess I look at meta-analyses as having values and limitations. I think they're absolutely best when there's a group of small studies that all generally are done well and in the same way and tend to come to the same conclusion. If none of those are statistically significant because their size is too small, then a meta-analysis can really derive a very important statistically significant conclusion. If the studies differ a great deal, if the heterogeneity is too great, then really perhaps a randomized clinical trial is best in those instances. There is no question we will see more of this kind of literature, and the editors here at JACC will go through these very, very carefully to pick out those studies which are best done and which yield the most consistent and valuable clinical data. Because one thing is clear, we will see more meta-analyses, and they will play an increasing role in developing guidelines for evidence-based medicine. For The Genuine Article, I'm Tony DeMaria.
Have a question or comment about a CVN story? Send us an email at cvnfeedback@acc.org.